fam. So, as I had mentioned in my last video, I'm going to focus on the lock-on config and the range settings that you can use on the different turrets and artillery weapons. So, let's get right into it. I'm going to go pretty briefly into this. So, when you have a certain gun, firstly you need to go into adjust mode, and then once you click on a certain component, you can go to the configure section, and it's got a certain max range for each weapon depending on the type of weapon, and also something called the lock-on config. So the range is basically from how far away it can start targeting. If you watched the last video, I had also shown how the targeting system works in terms of the range, like how the guns actually pick up on the range portion. Coming to the lock-on config, that is basically the priority of targeting in terms of which enemy should be targeted with what priority. So if I had a 30mm light gun, I would normally have it set at something like max range, for example, and then I wouldn't have it target small units at all. I would have it medium for your medium units and high priority for the large. And depending again on the setup, for example, I would have it apostles at low. So this is a kind of configuration that I would have. Again, something like early on in the game when you don't have the other weapons and things like that, is mostly a combination of MG turrets and your 30mm light guns. Then you would want them to even maybe have apostles at medium. So you would have something like this, so medium, large and apostle. So in terms of enemies coming in groups, the priorities would be, it would always target your large units first, and then either your medium or apostle, whichever one is present there. So that basically is how the config works. It wouldn't target small units at all, even if it's within range, and of course I wouldn't keep it for something like massive. Now in combination with that, simultaneously early on, again if it's early on in the game, your primary weapon is like your MG turrets that do the bulk of the damage. So for this you would have it set at maybe max range. You would have it high priority for your small units, low for your medium, and maybe medium for your large. Now apostles, again depending on how many of MG turrets and 30mm light guns you have on the base. In my bases, I wouldn't have them target the apostles. I would have more of your 30mm light guns, which would be targeting the apostles more, and this kind of setup, for example, on the other units. So the combination would work in a way that your 30mm light gun would do this targeting, even though it's coming within higher range, because it's got 8000 compared to your MG. It's not going to be targeting your small units. So your small units are going to get closer into the base, and your MGs would then come into it and start targeting those and eliminating them on high priority. Whichever are the mediums that do manage to get closer, the MG would again start targeting them at a lower range, and so on and so forth. So it's normally a combination. That's a thing to be kept in mind, that when you're doing it, it's generally combinations of different types of weapons that you would use to effectively take care of all the enemies. So your lock-on config portion and your range are basically in tandem. They have to be in tandem with each other depending on the different types of weapons that you're using. That also makes a difference, because that range, like I had mentioned in that turret video, the range is different for different weapons. So your combinations make a difference. MG, for example, is 5, this is at 8, this one goes up to 10. So again, a combination of this and this, for example, that would be again another effective combination in terms of taking down multiple groups of enemies of different types. When you come in further, you could have like the Vipers, because they have armor piercing. So the configuration would be slightly different. Again, I would have it at max range depending on the placement. I wouldn't have them targeting small at all. Sometimes I wouldn't have them targeting even the mediums. I would have them mostly for the large, and maybe on low priority for the apostles. So it just depends how you want to do it and what combination of weapons you're using, so that you're covering the entire group, but then each of them is doing the targeting at a different range and at different settings of priority. So that's the thing that's important about that whole thing. When we come to something like the CIWSs, then it's slightly different, because if for a general sort of run, I would have them targeting pretty much most of them, not the apostles or the massive. I would have something like high for your small units, medium can remain at that, large also not that much, I would keep it at low, and missile, which is another option that comes up for the CIWSs and your Hellfires as well. It's the option, that's the only time it comes up for these two types of weapons, is the CIWSs and the Hellfires. So the missiles are normally the ones that are fired by your big bosses, either Kronos or Krios. Once they come in and they appear, they normally would fire missiles right at the start, just after they land, and one lands and the other one flies in through the field, and also just before they die they also fire missiles at that time. So that is the time when this option comes into it, because your other guns will not be able to target the missiles. So you would have missiles on high most of the times for either your Hellfires or your CIWSs. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Now another way you can utilize it is on some bases. I'll do it differently and show you. So if I go into something like this, so you could have like a row on the ramps. Again, this is just an example, it's just to give you an idea. And I go back into config. So if you notice now, they are kind of facing upwards. It's at a different angle. And what you would do is you would select all of these and have them target maybe only the missiles. Now selection, if I did not mention before, you can select multiple. There are different ways of doing it. So one way is you can drag and try and select them that way. So you have a selection, but then if it's close to other components, like there was one here, then that would also get selected. So you can press shift and unselect a certain one. So now as you noticed, I unselected this, so that's not part of the group. All the other CIWSs are still selected. And now when I go to configure, whatever I set in there is going to apply to all of them at the same time. You can go ahead and change it manually for each one, but that's another option. For this example, what I wanted to show was, you go to configure, you set it at max range obviously, but you would remove all the other options for all the other enemies and only target missiles on high priority. So this sort of setup can be used somewhere in the front line. Preferably I think at a higher level would be more effective, somewhere like here, if you had an entire row, something like that, and then you can have them only target the missiles. So what happens is that gives me the option that if I have other CIWSs on upper levels, then I can configure them not to target the missiles at all, and I can have them target some other enemies at different combinations depending on how it's been placed. So that's another way that you can use different setups to target specific types of enemies or specific components. So you would have, even for example, take the Viper and have it only target, for example, the large units and nothing else. Again, you can have combinations of this. So you could have a row of Vipers, for example. Let me get some of these out. So you could have multiple Vipers that close to each other, and you could have one of them doing this, and maybe some other ones which you want to target the other enemies at different priorities. So now since that one is taking care of the large, I would have this unchecked on here so that I don't have them all shooting at that same target, and I could maybe go for something like this. I mean, normally you don't use wipers for the small units, but just as an example. So what this does is now you have it in the same line, but they're targeting different types of enemies. This one would only target your large units on high priority. These two would target the other types and not the large, as this one would take care of the large. So things like this, different combinations. You wouldn't ideally want all of the same type. Like I mentioned before, you would have combinations of, because there are certain guns which would damage, the rate of fire differs, the type of ammo differ. These are armor piercing rounds that they use, so more effectively you would want them against things like the apostles or your large units and things like that. So it's again kind of, you got to try out different combinations based on the guns that you're using, and then you can accordingly set in tandem with your range, obviously, because you don't want, now in this case I had just shown with that same range, but when I'm doing it on my basis, even if it's like this, the range also would be different. Now when it comes to things like the hellfires, you always, I normally always put it on the max range, all the hellfires, and the setup would be something similar to this. I might move around a little bit, but more or less this is the kind of setup that I would have. So they would target pretty much all types of enemies except of course massive. I don't normally keep it for massive because the big guns would normally take care of the massives quite easily, so I don't leave this option on. Also, another thing to keep in mind is, for example, you set a particular config for the guns, and then while you're in game you realize that maybe a certain portion, like for example this front portion, got destroyed. You can, while in game, change the config through command mode. That's another thing just to keep in mind. It's not like once I set it here before I start going into the mission, that once I get there I can't change it. You can, while the game is on, you can change those targeting parameters while in game by selecting the particular component and then accordingly setting a different config for it based on whatever the need at that time may be. So that's another thing to just keep in mind. Other things like your artillery, I normally have something like your twin barrel 105 mm's, and these I would always have them at max range, and I would only have them targeting the apostles, for example. So I wouldn't have them worrying about not even the massive, I just have it for apostles. Similarly, along with that, I would have something like the rocket arrays doing the exact same thing, max range, only thing this is much lesser compared to that, and apostles only, it's not targeting the other enemies. Similarly, for your big guns, you would have them targeting only the massive units and nothing else, and also on max range. So there are different people who use it differently. I've seen quite a people videos where they say, they have those targeting the apostles as well, but I've found it to be quite effective when I work on my layouts. It's effective that your twin barrels and your rocket arrays, and also another thing is once I get to recovery day, I would enable auto fire for these, for your twin barrel as well as the rocket array, so that the moment the apostles actually appear and land, that they are automatically targeting them immediately and can get rid of them quite easily, quite fast. Because I also sometimes have combination of the smart mortars which are also set for apostles, so you have basically like 3 weapon systems that are all targeting the apostles, and it works out quite well. Now coming up to another aspect which I believe works the way I think it does, is sometimes the guns at an elevation are more effective in terms of targeting compared to guns at the lower levels. So if you have something like this with hellfires on this level here and then some hellfires on top, then I just feel that these ones on top are more effective in targeting, as in I'm not really sure how it works. Maybe that's just how it's been programmed in terms of the targeting parameters, but they would target the enemies further away than this one here, even though this one is ahead and these ones, I know the difference is not too much, but still this one, before this one picks up, these ones would be able to have it based, I guess, on the height and the field of view, and they would target the enemies. So I would always have some set of hellfires at higher elevations. For me it seems to work, so I'm not really sure if it's that way for all the guns, but with the hellfires I've seen that it tends to be more effective that way, having them at higher elevations. And other thing, well, the exterminator is, well, it depends how you want to use it, because the range is okay. It's like the hellfire, it's the same range, so I would have it for something like this in terms of the setup. A bit low for the medium units, and then I would have some sort of support unit next to it, like maybe 30 light guns, which are having high priority for mediums right next to it, so that in case it doesn't get any, then this one can come in with low priority and take care of whichever got through and things like that. So it's just combinations, like I said at the start, different combinations, and you also play around with the range. So if you have them like in a row like this, now this was for a different example, but if I wasn't targeting, I would have, let's say for example, maybe like the 4, like 2 on either side. I would have to unselect that, okay, and I would, for example, have it at max range. Missiles is okay, missile you can keep it at high. I can have it like small, then medium, large, something like this. This is again with max range, and these are only the 4, 2 on either side. And then I would go to maybe these ones here, and these ones I would have it at a lower max range, like for example 6000, with similar stats like the other ones. Now the difference is the range again. So what that does, now again this is just an example, I'm not going with the exact things. So what that would do is, once you actually have enemies coming in, again this is to be taken with them facing a normal angle, not facing upwards, but then the field of view changes. If they are facing upwards, then it's only targeting coming in from the top there. So if it's facing like these ones here, that is the example I'm taking. So what they would do is, if the enemies get within your 8000 range, then the ones on the side only, so there's 4 ones, the 2 on either side, only they would target the enemies. So if there's a large group and the enemy gets closer, once it comes to within 6, then your next 3 would start targeting, and so on. So I would have like sort of a cascading kind of range effect on this, so that not all of them are doing it at the same range. So you would have the range slowly decreasing as we get towards the inner part of that group. So the ones at the outer edge would be the highest range, and it would get lower as you come in towards the center. So that's another thing that I've tried out, so that you don't, again, all of this, like I had mentioned in that other video as well, is to effectively utilize the ammo. So your guns are not wasting ammo, all targeting the same enemies at the same time. So then you have, like, if I had it set for the entire row, then all of them would be firing at the same enemy. So that's what, 3, 6, 9, 12, 13 guns are all trying to kill the same enemy. I mean, it wouldn't need all of them, but then they would fire at the same enemy if there was just one enemy there, and sometimes you're in the map and you just have one enemy in a certain place, then all of them would be targeting that same enemy. So to minimize that is why you do the different ranges and the different targeting configs for each weapon differently, so that they are not targeting the same enemy at the same time and wasting ammo. Now it's more important for things like your hellfires, because as it is, a hellfire by itself goes through ammo extremely quickly, and then you imagine you had a row of hellfires, 4 or 5 hellfires in a line here, and then all of them are going through that ammo that much quicker because they're all firing at the same enemy and wasting ammo of sorts. So that basically is the main basis of your lock-on configs, and the range, using it and utilizing different combinations of guns, and also the setup in terms of how to set the range for different weapons at different times. So hopefully some of you found this useful and gives you a better idea. Of course, you would have to sit down and try out different combinations of guns. Now that again is individual preference. I cannot tell you which gun should be used with which other one, but how I normally would do it is you would have something like your CIWSs, which have a very high rate of fire, or the Hellfires, and that would be combined with something like your twin barrel or your Vipers and things like that. So the combination, because these, some of them, they have armor piercing rounds, so I would have them target your bigger enemies or the medium, and then your CIWSs would focus more on your like smaller enemies and mediums on a lower priority. So again, different combinations, you have to try out different things and just come up to what you would feel is effective. Also, another important thing is the placement of how the guns are placed and where they're placed. Like I mentioned, most of your enemy comes in from the front here. There are very few times when you have them coming into the side. If you're on recovery day, if your forward base position is destroyed, then you would have them coming in from the sides as well. So again, you have to have enough firepower on the sides as well, on both sides, if that happens, because then you have enemies coming in from all 3 directions at the same time. So that is when your range and your priorities of targeting, I think, are more effective, and makes more sense when it's in that scenario, when you have multiple groups of enemies coming in from all different sides. So that is mostly when you don't want them all shooting in one direction. You want them all to be spaced out and effectively taking out enemies which are coming in from all different directions. So I think I'll stop it at that. I hope some of you found this useful. Please do like and subscribe to my channel, guys. It would help me out. That's it for this video. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care. Bye, guys.